AFM and NPP exhaust. What is it? What do I have? How does it work? What is going on when I press these buttons? How do you know if you have these systems? And why are only certain exhaust tips dirty? I'll explain all that right now. So if you're new to Corvettes or other GM products and you've seen all these things around about AFM exhaust, NPP exhaust, what is it? How do I know if I have it? How do I control it? How does it work? So on and so forth. But most importantly, a lot of people always ask, why are only certain exhaust tips dirty when other ones stay clean? Well, here's a general explanation as to why that all goes on. So here in front of me I have a factory 2021 C8 Corvette factory muffler. Sometimes they call this a suitcase muffler because of simply the size of it and the way that it looks and it sits. It's also very big and clunky. It's very heavy as well too. So to explain all this, I went ahead and I took this factory one and I cut it open for you. To show you exactly what's going on inside to help you understand everything that's happening. So after all that is removed, I went ahead and got to this point now where I can just easily take everything off for you. Now here in front they have this big black piece on top. This is just basically a heat shield. This is very important that you have on the car, but I'll come back to this later on as to why heat shields are important on these cars and why you generally should keep it if you could. Not always necessary, and some exhausts come without it, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. So you can go ahead and I'll just remove this heat shield, and once it comes off, you can see that I already have everything open and exposed for you. Here is the muffler and how it actually works. Okay, so on a mid-engine car, you obviously have the engine in the back, so the exhaust system itself is much shorter. It doesn't have as much of an exhaust flow path for it to come out, but you still have all your basic components. You're going to have the exhaust manifolds, the catalytic converters, sometimes you have secondary catalytic converters, then you have an X-pipe, generally on V8 cars, or an H-pipe. But on Corvettes and things of GM nature, usually they're X-pipe, and then it goes out to the mufflers, okay? So here's basically where it comes in. Now imagine this is in the car, and this is how it's sitting inside, okay? So this is going to be the driver's side, and this is going to be the passenger side. So both coming out from each bank. So let's just follow this one since I have more of this side cut open. You'll see how it crosses here in a second. So it comes out here where generally you'll have the catalytic converter about right here, up above where my hand is. So it'll come down this portion of the exhaust right here, and it'll pass through this AFM valve right here. I'll come back and explain exactly what an AFM valve is in a little bit. But once it comes down, it's going to come out this pipe right here. You'll see that it comes out, and this pipe are separate from each other, and I'll show you a close-up of that in a second here. Once it comes down, this pipe down here comes into right here. This is the actual X pipe. You can see it's in an X pattern. This is where the two banks flows cross with each other. That's kind of where you get the sound from, as well as a couple other things. But this is necessary for exhaust scavenging and flow and sound, and it's generally has a good purpose. So once it comes down here, it's going to go and it's going to cross over there, and it's going to want to flow out here, okay? It's going to follow this path right here. It obviously can't go into this one because if it goes into that pipe right here, it's going to go back up into the exhaust that's coming out from the passenger side. So it's generally going to flow this way and across. Once it comes over this way and across, it's going to follow this pipe across here, and it's going to go up here. Now you'll notice there are these holes right here, and I'll get back to them in a second. But then it's going to come out this pipe right here where you have your NPP valve. Now you'll notice the tip is gone because I already went and cut it off, but I'm going to show you exactly how that works, which is why I cut it off. But normally you'd have the rest of the tip coming out right here, just like you have on the other side. So it comes out the exhaust right here, and that's why you're going to primarily get a bunch of soot on the pipes out here on this side. Now, let's say this NPP valve was closed, or you're in touring mode. What's going to happen at that point is, since that valve is closed, it's going to come through the exhaust right here, it's going to hit that, and it's going to be blocked right there. It's not going to be able to get out. So it's going to come back around, and the excess pressure is going to come out of these holes. There are 4 of them, all 360 degrees around. So you got 1, 2, and then there's 2 underneath, 3, and 4. It's going to come out of these holes, and it's just going to kind of sit in this chamber a little bit, where it's not really going to have a whole ton of pressure to push it out, but it eventually will obviously get out because there is a vent way path for it to come out. Once you have this thing all sealed up, it's going to come out these holes, it's going to come out, and it's going to come around into this port right here, onto this opening. And it's going to go in there, and it's just going to flow out that way. So this does not have a valve on it. It's always open. So if you have the car in sport or track mode where these valves are open, most of the exhaust is going to come out this tip. There might be a little bit that comes out as a residual and gets caught and goes back in and comes out that way, but not nearly as much as that. But that's the general flow of the exhaust. Now here's a little bit of a close-up of that X pipe that I was talking about. You'll see that it'll start right here and it'll come down and it'll flow all the way down and over. And you'll see that those pipes in the back, they are separate from each other, like I explained before. But there's the X portion of it. It comes and it flows right there, comes around to that port right there, and goes around and out just like I explained. There are your holes. Again, there are 4 of them all the way around. It's kind of hard to see the ones that are underneath, but there's one here, there's one here, and then there's 2 more underneath around. And that's what causes it to backflow and come back out through this port right here, and then it'll come out of that tip on that side. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to know is, hey, do I have this type of exhaust? So there are a couple of ways to differentiate if you have this on your car to figure it out, but I'm just going to show you the easiest way that applies to pretty much most cars, and this happens to be, again, a C8 Corvette. So the easiest way you can do is come around to the back and come to your exhaust and come to where the actual tips are, and you're going to look inside and you're going to see inside there, you're going to see a little actuator on top of the exhaust. See it? There it is. It's right there. Big black box that sits on top of one of the exhausts has an electrical connector plugged in. These are the valves that open and close when you put it into touring or sport mode. This applies to pretty much all cars that have NPP. It's going to have this exact exhaust actuator somewhere close on the exhaust tips. The Corvettes, C6, C7s, C8s, the Camaros, ATSVs, CTSVs, and so on and so forth. This will be your easiest way to tell if you have it. Look to see if you have that actuator back there. If you have it on the tips, then you have NPP. Now that brings me to another thing that I want to clarify real quick. You're going to hear those terms thrown around a lot. NPP, performance exhaust, bimodal exhaust, dual exhaust, active exhaust, so on and so forth, okay? These are all basically terms that are all interchangeable. If you ever hear any of those terms used, they all mean the same thing, meaning you can open and close the valves in the exhaust to change the sound and or tone, okay? For reference sake, just for the rest of this video, I'm going to refer to it as NPP. So if you hear me say NPP, that's what I'm talking about. Now also, just to clarify, how do you know if you have NPP or not? You can differentiate if the car has it, if whether or not you have a Z51 package or a performance exhaust. So I'm going to take a page from a bunch of videos that I always like to watch, a guy called Engineering Explained, and he always uses a whiteboard to explain things, and I'm going to use it in a much simpler fashion than he does, but just to give you a general idea. So I'm going to get back to, again, the C8 Corvette, because that's the car that I'm dealing with here, but this does apply to other cars in other ways and shapes and forms. The algorithm will be a little bit different, but you'll kind of get the point here. So the first thing you want to do to find out if you have NPP exhaust or not is to find out, is your car a Z51 package? Okay, so if you have the Z51 package, you're going to go yes or no. Okay, now I'll show you in a second a couple of surefire ways how to tell you have the Z51 package in case you don't know. Again, not everybody knows. Some people are beginners. That's what this is for. So if you have the Z51 package, you do have NPP and AFM. Okay, so if you have it, you definitely have active exhaust if you have the Z51. Now, let's say you don't have the Z51. On certain model years, the Z51 package, if you did not get it, there was an option for you to get the performance exhaust. So let's say no. The next question is, do you have the performance exhaust? Okay, did you buy it with that? Do you have it? Again, I'll show you how to check that. Okay, if yes, then you have NPP and AFM valves. If no, then you only have AFM valves. Okay, now I'll show you exactly how to differentiate if you have Z51 or not. Just like I showed you before though, on the exhaust tips, if you have those actuators on the tips, you at least have the performance exhaust package. You may not necessarily have Z51, but you do have the performance exhaust. All Z51s have performance exhaust. However, not all cars that have performance exhaust are Z51s. So there are a couple of quick and simple ways to tell if your car has a Z51 package or not. However, some of them can be replicated or duplicated later on and might trick you, but there are a few ways to tell the difference. One thing that people will mention if you have the Z51 is if you have this, a front splitter. Now, if you have a front splitter, there's a good chance that you have it. However, this can be added later or put on aftermarket. This one happens to be an aftermarket one because I liked it a little bit better, but just because you have a front splitter does not necessarily mean that you have the Z51 package. Another thing that people go by is the Z51 style spoiler. Now, this car has a Z51 style spoiler because it is a Z51. But again, this is something that can also be added later. Now, here's another kind of dead giveaway. Look at your brake calipers. Do they say Z51 on them? If they say it, then guess what? You probably have it. However, this isn't always necessarily foolproof either. You can easily put these stickers on afterwards. As we all know, sometimes people like to up-badge cars a little bit. I can't imagine anybody would ever want to up-badge anything like that, it being as small as it is, but you have seen it with other cars. I've seen plenty of people with things like Challengers, and they put Hellcat logos on it that are not really Hellcats and so on and so forth, but whatever. So, but check the calipers and see if it has a Z51 sticker on it. Now, I have also seen cars that are Z51s that don't have that little sticker on it. It's very rare, but I have seen one person that it actually did apply. He did have a Z51 car, but it did not have those stickers on it. He did have the proper brakes, but they just didn't have that little sticker on it. I guess something happened in the factory, who knows, whatever. Another thing that people will say is, oh, well, I have this little Z button on my steering wheel, so therefore I have a Z51 car. No, not true. All cars have that little Z button on it for the C8 Corvette, because you can put all of them into Z mode. Now, that's something else. I'll cover that in a different video, in case you don't know what it is. But that little button right there, which I happen to have a little carbon fiber overlay on, so normally it's silver, is not a dead giveaway for a Z51 package. Okay, so here is the dead giveaway for the Z51 package. What you want to do is come on over to your passenger side air inlet. Okay, take a look behind that. I happen to have a grill in front of there just to protect it, but normally from the factory that grill won't be there if you didn't get it. But there is an extra radiator behind there. That little radiator is included in the heavy-duty cooling package in Z51. So if you have that radiator on the passenger side, then you have the Z51 package, and therefore you have the performance exhaust. If you do not have that there, then you do not have the Z51 package, but you still possibly could have the performance exhaust. Now keep in mind, this is the passenger side of a USA spec car in the United States. I have heard of in somewhere in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates, there are cars that have a radiator on the driver's side. Now, I digressed quite a little bit here, so let me get back to the whole point of this thing, which is explain the whole exhaust system. Now, the first thing I'm going to go into explain in depth is the AFM valves. The AFM valves are right here. You can tell there's a little bracket right here, and there's a little actuator. Normally there will be that black box that will be bolted onto this portion right here, and there will be a little rod that goes and connects down here to this ball joint and would open the AFM valves. AFM stands for active fuel management. Basically what it means is when the car goes into 4-cylinder mode, it shuts down 4 of its cylinders and it only has 4 of the cylinders firing and the other 4 are off. Well, when it goes into that mode, the AFM actuators on here will turn on and they will close the AFM valve inside here, which sits right here in this part of the pipe. When it does that, it closes the flap and then it has it blocked off with the exception of these 2 little holes, which I'll show you in a second. That's going to change the tone of the exhaust. The point of that is because if you don't have that on there and the car goes into 4-cylinder mode while you're cruising on the highway and those valves don't close, you're going to have this terrible raspy type of like droning sound, and it's going to sound really, really bad. So they put these valves in here to eliminate that sound so that way it doesn't sound uncomfortable, especially if you're going on a long drive or something like that. Okay, now here's the actual inside of the exhaust pipe. You can see that little flap down there, and that is the actual AFM valve. Now, when the car is in 8-cylinder mode, the valve is open, just like it is right here. Now, when it goes into 4-cylinder mode, the actuator will turn on, and it'll pull that valve
and it'll close it just like that. Now you see you got those two little holes right there. The point of those two little holes is to obviously let more exhaust flow through, or to let the exhaust flow through, excuse me. You can't block it off completely because otherwise you won't have any exhaust getting out. But when it closes like that, it changes the sound of the exhaust to eliminate that drone that you would be experiencing while it's in 4-cylinder mode on the highway while you're cruising. So again, that's what it looks like when it's closed. And when it's open, the flap opens up like that and lets it free flow all the way through. So open, closed, and there it is.
Now the NPP valve operates in pretty much the same exact fashion. It has the same exact type of actuator and same valve inside. This is the tip that I had cut off just to show you where the NPP valve is and how it actuates. Now, when you have the car in touring mode, or excuse me, in track or sport mode, it's going to be open like this and it's going to let exhaust just flow through, just like I explained before. But when you go into, say, touring mode or weather mode, the valve is going to close, just like that. Now, when that valve closes off, you'll see that it doesn't have those two little holes on it like the AFM portion did. That's because you want to close off the exhaust completely at that point. But it has somewhere to go. It's going to backfeed and go back out that other exhaust tip that I showed you before. So this is what it looks like when it's closed, and this is what it'll be when it's open, free flowing and louder. And that'll be when it's closed in touring mode and so on and so forth. So next you're probably wondering, how can you control these valves? So just to clarify, your NPP valves, the one that are on the tips that control the tone and the sound and the loudness of it, those you can control. The AFM valves, which are the valves that are going to be built into the system prior to the muffler itself, you cannot control those, technically. You can control the NPP valves from inside the car from settings that I'll show you in a second here. Basically tour, sport mode, things like that, of that nature. I'll show you how to do it on a C8 real quick. On a C7 it slightly differs. And on Camaros and ATS and CTSVs they also slightly differ a little bit, but you'll get the general idea. The AFM valves you cannot control per se. They are involuntary, or whatever you want to call them. Okay, you can't control them. The car will automatically open and close them as they see fit once it goes into automatic mode or 4-cylinder mode or V8 mode. Okay, now technically there is a way that you can control them. If you put the car into track mode, it will never go into 4-cylinder mode. That's built into the programming of that mode. So yes, in that way you can technically control the AFM valves, or if you put it in the manual mode, it also will never go into 4-cylinder and therefore never close the AFM valves. So before people start saying, oh yes, you technically can control them, yes, you technically can in that way, but you can't just flip them on and off with a switch like you can with the NPP valves.
Okay, now just to show you a way to see if you can control the exhaust, or how to control the exhaust from inside the car, this is what it's going to look like. Again, this is a C8 Corvette, so every car is going to be a little bit different, but you get the idea. So once you're at your home screen, you just go in here, you go to settings. Okay, oops, let me start from the beginning here, sorry. So you'll be at your home screen, you go into settings, and then you'll get this thing right here, this screen. So you want to make sure vehicle is selected up in the corner right there, and hit drive mode customization. Now from there you've got Z mode and the visualization and the my mode. Okay, so I leave the visualization on, which basically means that when you change the modes, it comes up on the screen and it tells you all the different settings that you have. You can turn that off, but I like to have it on because, well, that's just me. So what you do is you can go in either Z mode or my mode, it doesn't matter. We'll check Z mode. Okay, now if you look over there in the upper right hand corner, you have engine sound. See over here, it's all the way over to the right, which basically means the valves are open. I have them all the way open. But if I go into a different mode, like I have it set in my mode, you can see engine sound is down here on the bottom because you can't customize as much as my mode, but it's all the way to the left and the valves are going to be closed. So that's how you would control it from inside your car. Now, as you change it from tour mode and sport mode and so on and so forth, it will change with it, okay? So watch what happens. Right now, the car is off, but it's in tour mode, okay? So if I'm in tour mode and I change it and I click it and I go into sport mode, you can see the engine sound comes up right there and it's a little bit louder. And then if I go into track mode, it changes again and it's even more open or louder all the time. So now when it's in these certain types of mode too, at certain points when it hits like certain gears and things like that, it will automatically turn the valves off, so that way you don't have droning and things like that. So that's why you'll see those different settings, like kind of like partially open or partially closed. That's basically what it means. It doesn't partially open or close the valves, it'll just turn them on or off automatically at different times. Now, if you go into track mode like it has right there, it will never go into 4-cylinder mode, and you will also keep those AFM valves open at all times, because it will never go in 4-cylinder mode, so therefore it will never need to turn them off. Now again, this is a C8 Corvette. On a C7 or on a Camaro, on an ATS-V or CTS-V, it can be a little different. You go into the settings and you'll see it, and you can actually manually control it to either be track mode all the time or sport mode all the time or whatever you want all the time. In this particular car, that's how they have it set up. So if you want to change it, you just change the different modes, and that's how you can check from the inside.
Now, this brings me to one of my next points, and probably one of the main, if not the main reason I want to make this video, and that is, why are only certain exhaust tips dirty? Well, because you only ever have 2 of them really open at any given time. You've got the outer ones and you've got the inner ones. The outer ones, like on these 2 right here, that is when the car is in track mode or sport mode, or if you have the valves open. It's going to come in and it's basically going to come out and kind of be like straight piped in a sense, where all the exhaust is going to flow out of those 2 tips. You're not really going to have any flow out of these exhaust tips on the inner portion of it, because it's all going to come out this pipe. Yes, like I said before, some of it will come out these little holes and kind of sit up in that chamber and eventually work its way around into these pipes and come out that way, and you'll get a little bit on that side. But for the most part, the vast majority of the exhaust will come out of these tips. Now, if you have the valves closed, like I said, the NPP valves closed, it will block that off and it will come back around and it'll go all out these tips, or the inner tips on this particular car. So, and that is why these tips will then be dirty, because all of the exhaust is coming out of these. The only way to ever really have your tips kind of equally dirty is if you turn the system into tour mode or sport mode, or open the valves on and off completely 50% of the time. And then you'll have, half of the exhaust coming out half time on one tip and half of it coming out on the other tip. But this is why only some tips get dirty and the other ones stay perfectly clean. Because at no point do you ever really have equal flow out of all 4 tips from the exhaust on these cars that have NPP on it. Now, I wanted to go back and revisit something again too, and that is the heat shield that I had originally taken off of this thing in the beginning of the video. The heat shield will normally sit right on the exhaust just like that, and it bolts into place and it stays right there. This heat shield is pretty important, okay? There are some manufacturers that you can buy aftermarket exhausts on this car that don't have heat shields on them. Now, not to say that that's bad per se, but it's not the way the car was designed originally. Now, there are some manufacturers that make heat shields that go along with the system. For instance, I have a Borla attack system on my car, and it comes with a heat shield. The heat shield is not necessarily meant to protect the exhaust, but it's meant to protect everything else around the exhaust. And because the car is a mid-engine car and everything is in the back, there are a lot of things back there that are exposed to heat. That is the point of the shield, to keep that in there and get it out the exhaust before it can potentially damage things over a long period of time, over prolonged exposure to high heat temperatures. Now, other exhaust systems, they don't have the heat shield. Now, maybe because of the way they're designed and flowed, it doesn't insulate as much, and it gets it out a lot quicker, so therefore there isn't as much heat in there to be stored and damage things. But that is why you have heat shields otherwise on other cars, and that's why they're basically in place. I, for one, have the heat shields on my Borla. I'm going to keep them on there to protect everything else around there, but I know some people will also like to take them off for the looks of the way, of the appearance of it, because you can see it kind of through that grill a little bit. It looks great, but I'm going to keep the heat shields on mine, but again, that's just me. Now, another thing that I'm going to touch on here is simulators. You can get these things called NPP or AFM simulators. Now, the point of those is that if you get a system that you ultimately end up eliminating your valves, you have to have these little simulators in place to trick the car into thinking that the valves are still there. Now, on this particular car, you have the AFM valves right here on either side. Now, if you were to say get a track mode or touring mode exhaust from some other companies that eliminate these valves, which you can get, and I'll cover in a little bit, you're going to need to put those simulators in place. You can't just unplug the valve and leave it unplugged. The car will, look for the valves that are in place, and if it doesn't see them, it will throw a check engine light. Now, if you get these little simulators, they're just these little black boxes that you're going to plug into the electrical connectors, then you can tuck them up out of the way, and it will keep your check engine light from coming on, because it will trick your computer into thinking that the valves are there. Now, the other way you can get around that is that you can just unbolt the actual black actuator itself and plug it in, and you can tuck it up out of the way and zip tie it in place and tuck it up out of the way if you want, but it's kind of big and clunky and it doesn't really look that good, and the simulators just look so much cleaner, and it's just an overall better fitment for it. Now, if you have those actuators in there, it's going to turn the actuators on and off, and again, it thinks it's still in place because it can't tell that the actual mechanical valve is not in place or not. It just wants to see that electrical signal. Now, you can also get simulators for the NPP portions in the back if you get a full track exhaust, but those you also can leave disconnected, and it shouldn't throw a check engine light. At least on prior cars it didn't. I've heard on people with C8s, so some people saying that some people it did throw a check engine light, some people it didn't. All cars are different. So that's where it kind of comes into play, where you gotta make a decision on your own as to which exhaust you want to buy. Now, I'm going to go over that here in a second as well. So as far as buying all different types of exhaust, you have a bunch of options out there. A lot of companies make different exhausts for it. Borla, Corsa, Paragon has a couple different ones, AWE, so on and so forth. A lot of them, pretty much for the most part, are all very high quality. But that's why they're also so expensive. So, example, a Borla exhaust, a TAC or a Corsa exhaust will set you back $4,000 plus sometimes. Depends on what you get. Okay, so if you look at it, you're going to want to differentiate if you have certain valves or what you're looking to get. Okay, so to start off, we'll go with a simple 4-valve one. So you want to retain all 4 valves and keep your NPP function and keep your AFM function. Okay, so if you do that, your choices basically, off the top of my head, are Corsa and Borla. There might be 1 or 2 other ones out there. I think maybe Hooker, Blackheart makes one or something, but I'm not 100% sure. Do your research, see which one you like. Now, the downfall part about that is that you can watch a million videos online as to how these things sound. It's never going to do it justice as to what it sounds like in person. So you're just going to kind of have to possibly take a little bit of a leap and buy something and not sure of, or see if you can find somebody that has that exhaust on their car, see what it sounds like, and you can see it or you can hear it in person. Now, if you buy an exhaust that has all 4 valves, you're going to retain all 4 valves, and you'll retain all functionality, AFM and NPP. Now, there are other exhausts that you can buy, say a touring exhaust. A touring exhaust may or may not have any of those valves. If it does not have NPP valves, which it'll say in the description, you are now going to eliminate these valves over here. And if you eliminate those valves, you will lose the functionality of controlling the sound of the exhaust by which mode you're in. Now, you probably want to get simulators in there, or like I said, tuck up that other old valve up out of the way, or sometimes you can just leave them disconnected like I had prior mentioned, but you may or may not get a check engine light. All cars are different, it's weird. So, but if you do that, that's going to be basically the path that you're going down. If you get a track exhaust will for sure eliminate the NPP valves, and it will probably be a straight through design. That is your loudest option that you can get. It's going to be a straight raw sound. That is something that some people want all the time, but a lot of people probably don't. If you're daily driving a car and if it's loud all the time, this is just me personally, it will eventually get old and you will not be happy with it and you will want to change it out. I did this on a prior car, 2 prior cars actually. You think I would have learned the first time, and then I had to go back and change it again later on. So that is one thing you want to consider with a track exhaust. A touring exhaust, like I said before, will do the same thing, except it more than likely will have some sort of muffler on there. Not one that you can control, but it will have a muffler on there. Now, there are other systems that are track exhaust systems or even touring exhaust systems that will differentiate if it eliminates the AFM valves, if it eliminates these 2 valves. Now, some systems will keep the AFM valves but not have NPP. And some systems will eliminate all 4 valves. And there's even some systems out there that will let you keep NPP but eliminate the AFM. Now, the problem with eliminating the AFM is you're going to have a little bit of drone when you're driving on the highway because it's not going to be able to open and close to differentiate between the 4-cylinder, 8-cylinder mode to eliminate that drone. Now, in these cars, in the C8, I have heard it is pretty minimal, to be honest with you, but it is still there. Some people it might not bother them, some people it might bother them a lot. Me personally, I wanted to keep all 4 valves, so I bought a 4-valve system and put it on my car. I love it, I think it's great, but again, that's just my opinion. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. If you don't mind the little tiny bit of drone, but you're daily driving, something like that, then probably a touring exhaust is probably going to want to be the way that you go. Because it's going to be loud, it's still going to sound good, but it's not going to be so obnoxious, it's going to kill you all the time. Now, with the AFM valves out of the picture, like I said, you probably will get a little bit of drone on the highway speeds, at least slightly, but some people say that it is so minimal that it doesn't even bother them. But again, it all comes down to taste, your preference. If you get a track exhaust, it is going to be loud all the time. If it's a weekend toy type car and you're only taking it to the tracks or things like that, then that might be the route you want to go for because it's going to be loud all the time. But if it's loud 100% of the time and you can never shut it up, it might not be your best choice for a daily driver. And then, like I said, if you want to keep complete control over the car, have it be loud when you want, and quiet when you want, and comfortable when you want, or loud when you want it to be, you want to get the 4-valve system so that way you maintain complete control over the system itself. And finally, I'm going to come back to the whiteboard here to kind of give you an overview of everything that we talked about here today. And just to give you some clarification on the NPP and AFM exhausts on different cars and how they work. So here's a basic exhaust system that I've already drawn out for you just to give you an idea. Now I modeled this after a typical front engine rear wheel drive car like the C6, C7 Corvette, the Camaros, the CTSVs, so on and so forth, okay? So up here you have your V8 engine, you got your manifolds coming out. Exhaust is going to be coming out this way, and it's going to flow down into the primary catalytic converters. Now once it gets past the catalytic converters, on the C7s and CTSVs, you're going to have secondary cats right before that. On a C6 Corvette, you will not have the secondary catalytic converters. It will just flow right back down past the primary cat. C6 generations do not have secondary catalytic converters from the factory. It wasn't a requirement, I believe, at that time. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. Then once it comes back, it's going to come back here and it's going to cross into the X pipe. Now the X pipe is going to be before the muffler on certain types of cars, with the exception of the C8. The X pipe at that portion is going to be incorporated into the muffler as I showed you once I had it open and torn apart. There is going to be an X pipe somewhere. It just depends on where it is in the system, depending on the length of the system. The C8 obviously has a shorter length exhaust system, so they had to put it in a different place. So once you get past the X pipe, you're going to have your AFM valves, okay? On a C7 Corvette, or a C6, or a Camaro, or a CTSV, you're going to have the AFM valves after the X pipe. On the C8 Corvette, you're going to have the AFM valves before the X pipe because the X pipe is part of that muffler. Okay, so they had to do it that way just because of the compact design of the C8's exhaust. Now, on every other car that's not a C8, after the X pipe, it comes in the AFM valves. Depending on if the car is in 4-cylinder mode or 8-cylinder mode, is going to be whether or not these valves are opened or closed. Now, if you have a C6 Corvette, you will not have AFM valves because those cars do not have active fuel management. They never go into 4-cylinder mode because it was never built into the car. So that's an advantage to the C6 that a lot of people will view that as an advantage for it. But if you have a C7 or CTSV or C8, you have that. Okay. Now once it gets past the AFM valves, depending on if they're open or closed, like I was explaining before, it's going to go down into the mufflers. Now once it comes down into the mufflers, you have the NPP valves. Once it gets down here, it'll flow, and if the NPP valve is open, then it's going to go straight out that exhaust tip or the outer tip on both of the mufflers, depending on the car. I'm not sure if the C6 have them on the inner or outer, and I can't remember if the C7 if it's inner or outer, but either way, it'll only be a pair of the tips, one per muffler, okay? So it'll come out that side. If that NPP valve is closed, again, it will be blocked off and it'll kind of go back into the muffler and kind of like turbulate and be all around and everything in there. And it'll come out the other exhaust tip, which will make it quieter. So because it kind of went through more of a muffled process. So this is your basic outline of the exhaust system and how they generally work. This is modeled pretty much after a C7 Corvette. The only difference is with a C6, they'll take away the secondary cats and there will be no AFM valves. With a C8, there is secondary cats, but they're kind of compacted into the primary cat. That primary cat that you have on a C8 has two catalytic converters in it. There are two separate chambers. Okay? Don't think that you don't have a secondary cat. You do. It's just one piece. Okay? So once it goes past that, it's going to go into the muffler, and inside the muffler, the whole suitcase muffler, is where you have your X-pipe and your NPP valves incorporated in, but the AFM valves are a little bit earlier in the system, as I explained before. So I know this is a lot to take in. I tried to explain it as simply as I possibly could. For those of you that are new to this and new to Corvettes or GMs and wondering about all the exhaust systems and how they work, I hope this helped. I hope it answers some questions. If you have any other questions further, let me know and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope this helps. Good luck.